Hey, it's Chris. Distilled. Smooth as you might think with some of these alcoholic-based themed games, or is it going to go down a little rough, depending on your play style and what you prefer? Does it live up to the hype? Let's go. So in case you're not familiar with Distilled, a lot of stuff in front of me. This is because it's a point salad, tactically based merging of cards in order to make your alcohol shine. Ooh, getting punny there. So you are a brewer. You have your brewery, and you are going to be slowly gathering ingredients and hodgepodging from the acquisitions up here in order to score your points to get the most points at the end of 7 rounds. Well, how do you do that? Well, like I said, you just brew them in a combination of systems that we have seen before, but is also slightly new and nuanced. And this is probably the biggest point here at the beginning is this is retreading a lot of ground you've seen in many other ways. This is a point salad, mix matching, homogenization of iconization all over the board. You have your spirits, you've got your advanced elements, you've got your main ingredients, you've got the board itself with your little sideboard. And it does an amazing thing. And I'll say this as the first main positive in this game. It is smooth. The biggest disconnect I have when I talk about Euro games, no, I'm not going in over the rules. I'll get there in overview a little bit in a second, but not doing it minutia by minutia. But I'm going to break it down for you a little bit section by section here. This game is smooth. And that is one of the biggest criticisms I look at when I'm looking at this Euro-style mechanistic approach, where you're combining, you're mitigating, you're slightly strategizing, because this is definitely heavier on the tactical side of things with a card and deck-based element, that you are having to make apple salad out of apples. And how good do you do that? But every element, despite the plethora, the multitude of things in front of me, I dare say nearly too much, it does it in a way that it makes, well, this thing, not really necessary. This is the expansion. You don't need it. I'll tell you that right out. The box, the base game, is more than enough for, I don't know, 12, 24 plays before you're ever going to get tired, because of the combinatorial system that I just mentioned. It gives you depth. It gives you replayability without having to buy additional stuff. Say what you will. Right? And that comes in the form of these. These are all of the different spirits that you're going to be making. At the beginning of the game, all you do is choose a predetermined number of these spirits, assign them very specific values based on the cards that you are given for recipes in the beginning, and you go. And you have 8 different recipe cards here that are going to slot anywhere from all of these 7 in different areas, from your bronze, your silver, and your gold brewing options, and give you rinse and repeat. And now that's not to mention, because every single game also offers you additional vodka and moonshine. And we'll talk about that in a second, because that's going to both be a great part of this game, but it's also going to be a frustration and a consternation for several of you out there who are looking for something slightly different. Because the basic premise of this game, as I mentioned, gathering your resources in the first phase. And the tricky part is with this, right? You can see I have 7 cards in front of me. You can buy 2. You can buy 2. Water, sugar, and yeast are essential for every single brewing. Alcohol gets added later. But you need to have them no matter what. Well, that's 3 cards, Chris. You need all 3 of them. You can only buy 2, right? This is where you start to see the level of strategy. You have different types of sugars. You have different barrels that are your options. And then you have your advanced options up here. The advanced options include items, more premium items of the barrel types down there that are going to allow you to brew better or brew dependent, because on this little card I just showed you, not only does it change what they are made of combination wise, it also has to be brewed sometimes in a certain barrel. And so again, you can see the victory points over here, and it tells you what recipe you have, and you just slot it in your little sideboard here, and it says this is what I've got. I put the little cube corresponding when I buy it, and I can only buy 1 of these as well per round. So 7 rounds, you've got 7 recipes. You're not going to be buying them all, because again, your resources are going to be split between this, and, well, tallying all of this. But at the top, you'll also see that moonshine and the vodka that I mentioned that you can automatically make every single turn. They're just worth a heck of a lot less. And then you get a signature recipe down here. And that's because you have an asymmetric brewer with their own signature item and ingredient, and you get extra bonus points if it matches. And this is where we start to delve into the deeper other areas, because you're going to have advanced sugars that are going to give you bonuses. You're going to have advanced items that you're going to modify on your factory in the first place, because you have 3 places in your distillery that are going to be able to have these either specialists or equipment to basically a la mode decide which way you want your brewing to go. Anything from increasing your sales, increasing your victory points, or increasing what you're starting out with at the beginning of a turn, or anything along those lines. Because again, like I mentioned, right, you have a huge deck of completely asymmetric ones here that are just going to be at your disposal, and this gets shuffled around every single round with the resources as well here, that you're just not going to have to worry about having enough variety, right? There's plenty in this base game, which is why I say you don't really need the expansion, because you won't get through all of them even with a player 2 potentially. Then after you gather your ingredients, this is the most divisive, because people are like, oh, it's so thematic, and then other like hardcore alcohol makers are like, well, it's not really what you do with some of these. And you know what, the essential mechanism is, right, you have all of your whatevers in here, and for every sugar you have in here, you add the equal amount of alcohol, and then you flip them over and you rinse and repeat this shuffling. And then for the part that people don't like, right, because this is the part that if you're a Eurogamer, this is the random chance element of things. You pull the top, you pull the bottom, and then whatever else is in between is what you get to choose to make from that recipe sheet that I just showed you right here. So I take a look, I have alcohol, great, and I've got 1 yeast, I've got my 1 sugar there, and I've got my water. So I would take a look and see what one matches this here, and see what I can make, because again, I can only make 1. Now the good thing is, well, you don't lose these ingredients and they get put back in for next round. So if you really get screwed, you're going to have more resources in this pile in order to make something better next round. But like I said, 7 rounds, when potentially maybe even the first round you may not distill in the first place, that's not a lot of wiggle room. And that's probably the other boon or curse, right? As a pseudo slight variation on a little bit of engine building here, because obviously as you have more options and as you get ahead, you have more strategy and you have more of those factory components and you've got better brewing option choices than the first place, because again, these are not like one size fits all. You use this and then you put the little token over here that is whatever it is, right? You put one of these from the distillery pile in the first place on the card to symbolize, okay, this is occupied. So you can't use it another time until you decide to utilize it. And what I mean by that is that some of these are immediate brews, right? Immediate. The vodka, the moonshine, boom, they score right away. But others need to be aged. And aging can happen for as long as you want, but you're going to occupy this card with that token, and you don't score it until it is, well, taken out of aging. So this is going to be lost to you until you decide to score. Well, why would you wait to score then, Chris? Phrasing. Because certain other elements in your factory, or just every turn, you're going to get additional flavoring, a la thematic incorporation here, that you're going to add to that pile. Because all of those cards that went into that pile, for example, if I pull those back out, right, some of them will have, like the alcohols, they'll get you additional coin to spend next round. Or some of the advanced elements up here of the advanced sugars will get you additional victory points in the lower corner. So you're going to be scoring that in those different ways. And so the more you have in there, the better it is. Well, more flavoring you have in there, again, the more points and coins it can potentially add to the taste of the alcohol in the first place. So the more of these you have, the better it is, the more it's going to score, the less you need to have a bunch of them, potentially. So options upon options upon options of how you're going to be choosing to mitigate this, adjust this. But as I was saying, right, why people don't like that is, well, I mean, they don't really call this thematic. Like, well, you don't actually take off the top and the bottom. Who cares? It's a unique, slightly different mechanism. But that's also why it's divisive, is because you just shuffle random and pull. That's it. That's going to piss people off. especially like I said, emphasizing you only do that 7 times. So if you do have that once or twice where there's not a lot of wiggle room to make up for it. So if you're taking this game less seriously, no biggie. If you're taking this game very seriously, this game might not be quite up your alley. Now, again, I didn't mention point salad, buffet, whatever you want to call it, style of things. You've got your spirit awards and you've got your distillery goals, and you're going to have these where you get 3 of the distillery goals at the beginning of the game, and after round 3, as you can see here, you discard 1 of them. So you have some options of which ones you're going to go for and how you want to build your strategy, and then choose which ones are more important. And then you pick several of these out at the beginning of the game, and if you get them, you get them, right? Collect the spirit label from 3 different regions, collect the spirit label 1 bronze, silver, and gold tier. So again, there's tons of different variety of end game scoring conditions that you can do in addition to whatever these are going to provide for you in the first place. That's the game. And again, I didn't mention as well, but on the bottom of the player board here, the other reason you're aging it further is because it's also a non-linear scoring the longer it's aged. So not only will you get additional points that way, but the flavors, but also the equipment that can give you more elements that you're dealing with here as a whole. The asymmetric powers are there. It gives you another way to make it slightly asymmetric than your opponents. But again, your mileage is going to vary because probably in your first game or two, these are going to be too complicated in how you're going to obtain the resources, how it's going to change your strategy, and just the fact that there are, again, this many of them, and it's going to be too much and too overwhelming for a lot of people. But that's the game. How do I feel about it? Well, I already kind of hit on the main elements, right? It is incredibly connected. I don't feel like there is any element in this game that doesn't fit. All of these are very, very intuitively interlocked, and that was a pleasure because I find myself playing games like this that are, truth be told, not my usual ilk, not my usual thoroughfare, but finding that 1 or 2 elements just don't click. There's this in apiary, there's this in expeditions, there's this in unconscious mind, where I go, this just isn't utilized. This one doesn't quite seem to be interwoven as well. This one just sort of leaves me feeling like I don't really need to do it. And there's nothing in this regard that has that flavor in the context of this game as a whole. The asymmetry, the engine build that I mentioned as well, is also evident at the top of your board because as you get different spirits aged and spent, you get to fill up these slots to get bonuses. Again, depending on when you need them, what you're getting. Free ingredients, free recipes, free items, free upgrades. So everything is at your disposal, even if you choose slightly off to begin the game. So there's a little bit of wiggle room as well. But it's not the most lenient game if you get behind or if you, again, have that draft, draw, pull mechanism and you just screw it up. Because, again, it's only on you, right? But that's going to be a make or break it for a lot of people. And I think that's okay to say. The main other criticism or critique that I say, right, is that each of these spirits, when we show them, when we look at them, right, there's only so many in every single pile. So most of these piles, for the basic ones, have 5. And so you can see, okay, once this pile's out, it's out. You can't make any more of this, even if you want to. So if somebody beats you to one of these repeatedly, especially at the higher player counts, you're just kind of SOL, which may not affect you whatsoever if your strategy was to go for other options. But especially at the higher player counts, when things are more limited, or even at the lower player counts, regardless of player count, maybe even, at the beginning of the game, you're going to be making vodka and moonshine. And the vodka and moonshine tiles are very limited. And there's going to be other rounds where you're building up for some of the bigger stuff if you spent and went for it. And if you can't make a vodka or a moonshine because you're only, again, not putting them all out there, not an unlimited making, just only having so many of them, you can potentially, especially at the higher player counts, not have one of those available to you. It's not common, but it definitely could happen repeatedly at the 3 and 4 counts from that aspect of things. So again, that rewards better long-term planning. But it also brings up the issue of you just kind of get squeezed sometimes between a rock and a hard place with a couple bad draws or quite things not going your way once or twice at the wrong time. Again, not as much wiggle room as you may like in that sense when you're only doing this, as I've repeatedly said now, 7 different times. The barrels also, they add a different element of things, because if you're not paying attention closely, it's easy to look at the ingredients. It's easy to look at the upgraded ingredients for the victory points and the coins. It's easy to focus on the factory stuff. That's just so cool to do. If you're not paying attention to the most potentially make it or break it, is that is also all need a different barrel. And yeah, you start out with like your generic bottle. You start out with, a generic barrel. So whatever you want, right? But you can't use those on a lot of the aged stuff. And they say right there, no aging. So there might be a little bit too lane guiding or staying on a certain track or path before you can start branching out in some ways. You're always going to have to get the barrels. You're always going to have to get some of this. You're always going to. And so a little bit of it could become, not needs to or is going to, but could become a little formulaic, especially in the first round or two. Deciding if you're going to go for extra resources, if you're actually going to try and brew something. Overwhelmingly, the temptation is going to be to go one way very much when you start playing this. But is it always going to be that way? Truth be told, I don't have enough play count or enough player count dynamic to let you know if that's truly the case in my limited aspects of playing this game. That would be my fear, not because I think the game makes you do that, just because I have a bias and a tendency to do what I think works and to stick with it, right? This game could reward you for going a little out there, but also with how option optimized this potentially needs to be at the same time. If somebody is doing something that works and you're trying something out, it doesn't give you as much room for experimentation in a cooking, crafting, creating style of game, thematically speaking, in the first place. So again, who's going to like this? Who isn't going to like this? This is tactics. This is heavy, heavy tactics. This is limited options, but very connected from a round-to-round, phase-to-phase situation where things will carry over to allow you to achieve momentum, but that doesn't completely fall flat on your face if you fail to make what you want on one turn versus, having to go a whole new turn to start over again, essentially. It doesn't have that failing in that way. I really, really like the asymmetry of the distillery options. This is by far and away my favorite. And truth be told, taking my resources and shuffling them up and drawing off the top and bottom, I don't mind it. I actually like it because it's something different. It's something to make the game stand out. But it's going to make a lot of people just disinterested because of the lack of control with a supposed Euro style of more strategic. But again, don't be fooled. This is heavy tactically based on what is presented to you. Which type of sugar and the iconography that goes along with that is going to correlate to which of the recipes that I have access to versus that I can get easier access to with the 8 different variations as a whole, depending on which game is there, which of the barrels are actually sitting out, because is there the wooden one? Is there an aged one? Is one not popping up? Are people taking the ones before I can get them? My limited resources of the 7 that are sitting down here in the first place that I can only get 2 of. Again, that's another big criticism. I don't think once you start playing this enough that the 2 is a barrier. But when you start playing it originally, only having access to 2 of these is very frustrating. It's very frustrating. And it's a little bit, not as intuitive, but it's a little bit bobbing into the deeper end of the Euro side of things at the same time. Really, like I said, option optimizing. The asymmetric characters are probably the least connected of the things that I found. But again, that's because I'm a noob when it comes to playing games like this. You may want to have that, again, to give you a slightly initial different strategy, because they all start with a slightly different power of, at the beginning of the phase, I just get one of the waters or the yeast added to my pantry to begin with. So problem of having 2 of these 3 every round? Well, I get one of them no matter what. So there's that. Sell each of my spirits for $1 more. So again, how is your strategy going to be slightly different? And so this gives it just enough. The recipes, I'm not as big, but the asymmetric powers, that's still a plus. All in all, what do I think of this game? I see why this was on people's lists for best of 2023. Truth be told, this is one of the funnest Euro-esque games I have played in a long time. It's easily one of the best, mechanically speaking, games that I have seen in the last year or so. No flattery there. It is. It all works very, very well together. But it's not going to work for a lot of people for those reasons. This is a game that I look at and I say, mechanistically, asymmetrically, tactically based, it is fantastic. It is exactly what I love up here, right? So from a non-biased, trying to be objective side of things, you know, it's really, really good. But personally speaking, I don't think I can justify, necessarily saying that this is a must buy. Because also with these phases of choosing and choosing and choosing and choosing and choosing, it's going to lead to a longer game time for a lot of people, especially at the higher player counts, especially with under 3 or 4 plays, because of so much to choose from. The variability, the depth of what is available to you in different interactions and dynamics is going to make the thought process longer on the table in the first place, which could lead a little bit of overstaying its welcome in that aspect. And so again, as long as you know that this is not going to be quite always as short as you may think in theory of what you're doing on your turn, the alternation of it is going to lengthen it out as an FYI. The other thing I just didn't briefly mention that I have to point out too is this flavoring, right? This flavoring, there's actually some stuff in here that you just don't get any benefit from, like plastic here on this card. It just doesn't give you any benefit whatsoever. And if you're aging and you're getting a couple of those in one spirit, that again is a little bit, the non-Euro crowd is going to not enjoy that just as much as they're not going to enjoy randomly shuffling and pulling 2 cards and hoping that you don't pull the one card that you've so, tediously banked on needing in that brewery in the first place. Which again, you can argue, is that a game problem because of the randomness? Or is that a you problem because you strategized and didn't do redundancies of having more than one of that card in your spirit pile, pantry-ish, in the first place? If you're looking for recipes ad nauseum and choices ad nauseum, in a way, like I've said, with all these elements, it's going to give you a ton. At the same time, it's going to be a little bit limited and you're going to feel a little handcuffed because you're realistically, optimistically, in a lot of these games, going to have the vodka and the moonshine and maybe like 3, maybe 4 if you're super adventurous of these different spirits available to you in any one game. So when you have this in front of you, again, you're not going to have access to all of them. Some people are going to look at this and I want to be able to do all of these. And you have to buy them and then you can be able to do it. And so it's going to handicap you a little bit in just what you can actually do, even if the plethora on the board illuminates and makes you misled a little bit in terms of what you think you should be able to do. And how do you reconcile those two things? Are you okay with that? Are you better at choosing that? Or are you better at, just having it all and then choosing rather than choosing and then choosing, if that makes sense? We talked about the objective. Personally speaking, I'm going to have a hard time getting this played repeatedly enough to justify it keeping in my collection. That's the truth of it. I think it is a fantastic game for a lot of people. But again, accessibility is going to be the biggest barrier because it is a little bit more of straightforward, and it's still, though, more. And so with a, 2-hour playtime at the higher player counts, is it giving you the decision weight making that you want at a longer playtime? That's more of the question for you slightly heavier Euro-ish people. And if it is, and this sounds great, again, I think you'll really, really like what they're putting out, as long as those small elements that I mentioned aren't detriments. If they are potentially, this game is not going to change your mind either. Those are going to be potentially make it or break it issues. So there you go. Like I said, though, at the same time earlier, if you love this game and you're going to play it a ton, this is great because it's giving you more asymmetry. It's giving you more of all of the good stuff that I mentioned out here. And so you're going to get plenty of it with this to make you, again, essentially never need more as well. So there you go. Smoothness. But again, depending on who you are, it still might go down a little rough. So that is Distilled. They sent me a copy to talk about, and I'm happy to talk about it. So there you go. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day.